Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Savvy Adjuster podcast. I'm your host, Chris Nichols, and I'm once again joined by Senior National Fire Experts Account Executive Kathleen Riley and National Fire Experts Fire Operations Manager John Hill. They are here today to give us a little bit more insight into parallel fire investigations, particularly how those assessment professionals can navigate the facts when evidence and witness statements don't quite gel. Thanks again for joining us here today. So we on our main episode we touched on collecting witness statements during an investigation in the longer episode, which if you haven't listened to that is up on your favorite podcast platform. So check that out. But we want to talk a little bit more in detail about witness statements versus what the evidence is telling us. Now, anyone who's watched police procedural shows knows that witnesses can be flawed sometimes. Kathleen, I'll start with you. Can we talk a little bit more about how that affects the insurance claim investigation?
Yeah, absolutely. So I found as an adjuster, it was always critical to get the statement from the insured and any witnesses as soon as possible. So you gather that information, get that statement from them. Now, when that statement is taken from them, a day, 2 days, even a week later, whether it be the adjuster asking questions they've asked previously and getting different responses, or the fire investigator out there getting a statement from that insured or that witness and getting different information, it can significantly impact the claim because now we're looking at, what information has changed. Does it, is it material? Is it something that, it's fact related that can impact whether or not there's coverage for the claim? Then we have to further explore what the evidence shows from there. Other, statements and information that can be obtained is when you have the public sector, if the fire department, they do interviews when they're on site, they could get different information. Now, there's a number of reasons why that information could change depending on what it is. And so you have to look at that as well. You can't assume that they're trying, to be misleading or deceitful. But oftentimes if there's information, critical facts that really shouldn't change, that you're seeing an alteration in as time goes on, maybe a refined story, there could be some concern there.
And John, anything to add from what Kathleen just mentioned?
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to witness statements, you have to remember, especially those who witnessed the fire itself, that most of the time, especially if it's a resident, it's their home, they're watching their personal belongings in flames, and God forbid, somebody's getting hurt. Somebody might be trapped inside. There are a lot of emotions that are sort of pouring through that person's mind and body, right? You have the adrenaline, you've got maybe a misunderstanding about how fire works, or just science in general, right? So they may see something. A great example of that would be with a cooking fire. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten a witness statement that indicates that the fire originated at the combination microwave vent hood above a range, right? So when they discover the fire, it's above where it started. It's up in the microwave, right? So they think, well, that the microwave must have started the fire. It's just it's a timeline issue. It's a misunderstanding issue, and again, the adrenaline. And typically, folks aren't really considering what's happening with the fire so much as I need to get out. How do I do that? That's what they're focused on. Who do I need to save? What do I need to save? And how do I get myself out safely? Not where is the seat of the fire? Where's the lowest point where the fire is burning, right? So that, and then that affects the memory, right? Over time, their memory tends to change. And on the topic of contents, there in the podcast, we were talking about contents and the inability to articulate what was in a building, or what type of item it was in a building. Maybe the recollection is it was a flat screen television when it was a CRT tube, but they're not trying to deceive. Maybe they just don't remember, right? If you were to ask me to fill out a contents inventory on my own home from memory without having the ability to look at it, I might be able to tell you probably where I bought something a few years ago, but not necessarily the brand, right? So you really have to take into consideration how different the story or the witness statement is compared to what you're seeing. And a lot of times for an investigator, you go in, you look at the physical evidence, you have an idea for what's going on. what may have caused the fire, and then you incorporate the witness statements, or try to understand how those witness statements either enhance what you're seeing or negate what you're seeing, if that makes any sense. It's not always a matter of deception. They're not trying to deceive you necessarily. You just have to figure out, what's their memory like. Well, if I'm interviewing someone, I may ask them the same question 3 or 4 different ways. I'll reword it. You have to pay attention to the order of the questions you ask, because emotions are going to start to build with that as well, right? So if someone loses a family member or a pet in a fire, or here's a big one. So someone's child has a tendency to play with fire. You're not going to ask those questions at the onset of the interview, because they're going to have a tendency to do what we call shut down. They're not going to want to answer any more questions. So you save those till the very end. You sort of start with the lowest or least intrusive, the simplest, easiest questions. Develop a rapport with the person you're talking to, get them to where they're starting to share information. Because if you start with, hey, has your kid ever played with fire? And they know that that's probably what caused the fire, they're going to try to protect their child. And I'd probably do the same, right? You're maybe not going to give any information, or you may try to steer an investigator in another direction, right? So it's a totally natural thing for people to do. So you have to take all those considerations, or all those things into consideration when you're interviewing witnesses.
Yeah, I've knock on wood, never had a fire claim, and nor I hope never to have. But I imagine it's a pretty emotionally charged event for anyone involved. John, we'll stay with you. How easy is it? We're talking about witnesses, right? How easy is it to identify witnesses when you get to the claim site?
It's not always easy. I mean, a lot of times it's cold calling folks or knocking on doors a lot of times. So you start with whatever contact you may have available to you. A lot of times we have someone who has a phone number we can call that will get us access to the scene or allow us onto their property. And then during the course of the interview, you're asking all sorts of questions about who else may know something about the property, or who else might have seen the fire. You're calling the fire department and those first responders. Who else was there? Were there any neighbors on scene? Was there a passerby who was driving down the road, saw the fire, and called it in, right? So you're going to want to talk to everybody, especially the people who witnessed the fire really early on in the timeline. Who was the first person to discover? Who was the person that discovered the fire, and the first person on scene after that?
So when Kathleen, we'll flip over to you for this next question. When you are getting the different information from witnesses rather than what the evidence is telling you, what do you feel is the best way to continue the investigation to make sure that you're getting an accurate origin and cause?
Sure. So, I mean, really what you need to do is go based off of all, the totality of the evidence. What are the facts? What is the evidence showing you? What are the statements that are being made? Is there any additional research or investigation that you need to conduct as an adjuster to clarify some things? There may be some statements made that contradict what happened, but again, is it material? Is it possible that those statements may have changed because of, emotions? Is there any indication that there is an intent to deceit here? And if so, what's the motive and why? And really, you just have to further explore that. Sometimes, you will find that there's enough information and evidence that you can gather in combination with the origin and cause findings that can determine, there's definitely an issue here. But also, you may find that, really there's no evidence to support that you can definitively say there is a concern here with any kind of nefarious act. Or there's just not. Sometimes you gather the evidence and the information and you say, you know what, it's a mistake that happened. We got clarification and we can proceed with the claim as usual. So it's really going to just depend on what that information is and a number of different things that can happen.
Sure. And John, anything to add, with your vast fire experience, anything to add as far as the best way to continue an investigation to make sure you're getting an accurate origin and cause when maybe stories don't match up with what's being presented to you evidence-wise?
Yeah, absolutely. So even in those situations where you believe a witness statement to be untrue or to not add up to what you're seeing at the scene, it's very important to continue to collect all the information you can. Right? We talked about the scientific method, and that includes um, just gathering everything and then determining how those pieces of evidence are relevant to the investigation. A great example might be if someone tells you that the fire they discovered the fire at 1:30 p.m. and you get the fire report and it indicates that it was called in at 1:20 or 1:15. That's not a huge difference. I probably wouldn't bat an eye to that. However, if I speak with someone and they say, "Hey, I got a phone call while I was at work that there was a fire," but the neighbor tells me that they saw them walking out of their own home while there was smoke rolling out of the windows, right? Those are two very different, contrasting stories that may very well have a bearing on the investigation. So, again, we're going to ask the same question, maybe multiple different ways, just as a test to say to ourselves, okay, are they misremembering, or if I give them a little more information, will they start to recall the accurate events as they happen, right? Now, for as an investigator, it's challenging to do that sometimes because what you don't want to do is let the person you're interviewing know that the story isn't adding up to what you're seeing, and you don't want to hand them the information to let them change their story to match what you were finding, right? You have to be there's a tact to it. It's not you're not hiding anything, you're not deceiving the person you're interviewing. You're just asking questions and letting them answer in a way that helps you formulate the whole picture.
Well, it sounds like it is a real skill set to navigate what the evidence is telling you versus witness information. And it sounds like national fire experts, no pun intended, are experts at doing that. So, really appreciate you both again for joining us and sharing a little bit more information on the topic. Of course, as always, thanks to our audience for tuning in, and make sure to always subscribe to the Savvy Adjuster podcast for more great discussions on a variety of property loss topics. Thanks again for listening today, and we'll see you next time.